Wonderful, thank you, and welcome everybody to the meeting of the San Diego Metropolitan Transit System Budget Development Committee. I am your chair, Vivian Moreno. Clerk, if you can please confirm there's a quorum, and if you could go ahead and proceed with roll call.
Good morning. Just a quick reminder to please turn on your microphone while speaking. Moreno,
Present.
Goebel,
Present.
McCann is absent. Moreno Step is absent. I'm sorry, Montgomery Step is absent. Whitburn,
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you so much, and I apologize, I didn't give you enough time to settle in.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to item number 2, which is public comments. Clerk, are there any members of the public wishing to comment?
We have no public comments, Chair.
Okay, so we're going to move on to item number 3, which is the approval of the minutes for our meeting on November 30th, 2023. Clerk, are there any members of the public wishing to comment?
We have no public comments.
Thank you. I am seeking a motion on this item.
So moved.
Thank you, Chairman Whitburn, and if I may have a second? Thank you so much. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. We're going to move on to committee discussions. Item number 4, which is the fiscal year 2024 operating budget mid-year amendment. I believe we have Mr. Meyer, Gordon Meyer. If you could please take it away. The floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Gordon Meyer. I'm the manager of financial planning and analysis here at MTS. This morning, I'm going to provide the presentation of the FY24 proposed operating budget amendment. So I wanted to give a brief overview of the budget development process so far. So the original FY24 operating budget was adopted on May 18th of last year. Since adoption, we've been coming to the board with monthly financial status updates where we cover year-to-date variances as well as major trends. As far as the FY24 mid-year development process goes, we met with all the managers and reviewed their expense and revenue trends within their departments. We compiled a list of all of the position change requests, and then we ultimately consolidated all of the budget adjustments into what you're seeing today. So we have the BDC presentation today, and then we'll be taking the same presentation to the board next week for presentation and adoption. And then just a side note, we are also working on the FY25 budget currently. That's a zero-based budgeting process, so we build it from the ground up. We still have a lot of work to do on that. And we have multiple BDC meetings scheduled for FY25 with ultimate adoption planned for May 16th at the public hearing. So getting into the actual numbers, so first we'll look at passenger levels. So the original budget assumed 80.7 million passengers for FY24. That is the yellow bar in the chart to the right. That target marks 16% year-over-year growth over last year's actual ridership after adjusting for the strike in May and June. So far from July through December, so the first half of our fiscal year, we've only averaged 9.5% year-over-year growth, so well short of that 16% target. And so we are now revising the forecasted passengers to 76.5 million. That's a reduction of 4.3 million passengers from the original budget, or 5.4%. And that new target now represents just under 10% year-over-year growth, so fairly close to what we've seen in the first half of the year. And then so visually you can see the orange line is the original budget. The purple line, the first half of the year, is our actual experience, and then the dotted line is what we're forecasting for the remainder of the year. So we looked at our forecasted ridership, so now we'll see how that translates into passenger revenue. So we originally budgeted 78.9 million. That once again is an orange line in the chart to the right. That target was 14.5% over the FY23 actual revenue. In the first half of the year, we were 2.2 million or 5.8% unfavorable to budget. During that time, average fare trailed what we had budgeted by 2.3%. We had budgeted 98 cents and we were coming in at about 96 cents. And in the first half of the year, we averaged 6.1% year over year growth, so well short of that 14.5% target in the original budget. So now we are revising the amended budget based on our ridership forecast from the prior slide, as well as our average fare assumption. Our new target is 74.6 million. That's a reduction of 4.4 million or 5.5% from the original budget. And now instead of 14.5% year over year growth, we're forecasting 8.1%. And that is a little better than what we've seen in the first half of the year at 6.1%. And that's because we do expect the average fare to be higher in the second half of the year based on how we spread some of the pass revenue for UCSD. So we looked at passenger revenue. Within operating revenue, we also have other operating revenue. And so one of the major categories here is energy credits. MTS generates revenue from both the state low carbon fuel standard or LCFS program, as well as the federal renewable identification number or RINs programs. So both these programs, we generate credits based on our consumption of renewable natural gas or CNG, electricity, as well as propane. When we generate these credits, either MTS directly or our vendors sell the credits on our behalf. And typically we generate about 8 million per year in revenue. And so the main driver of our variances in this category is really the credit prices for both the LCFS and the RINs. And so on the LCFS side this year, if you look at the top chart to the right, so we had originally budgeted $92.50 per credit. That's the red line. We had it starting at $85 and then gradually growing to $100. That was based on ARB posted guidance last year. They revised the carbon intensity targets for the state as a whole, and so that was expected to drive demand for these credits as companies would need to purchase more credits to offset their carbon footprint. We have not seen that happen yet. Our true experience is the first half of the yellow line. We've averaged a little over $70 so far year to date. And so we're revising that price target down to $70 for the remainder of the year. Fortunately, this year, the RINs price has overperformed what we had in the budget and is more than making up for the decreased LCFS price. The bottom chart to the right, you can see our original budget for RINs was $2 per credit. And then if you look from January to April, that's really our budget development cycle. And we were hovering last year around $2. And so that's where we came up with the $2 figure. Fortunately, we started the year at around $3 per credit, and we've stayed at an average of $3.15 per credit so far. And so for the remainder of the year, we're including a price target of $3.10 per RINs. And so as a whole, we're amending the budget upward by 417,000 or 4.4%, and that's due to the RINs performance. Next, within other operating revenue, we have interest revenue. So we originally budgeted $2 million. That's the red line. And as we know, interest is a function of cash balances as well as interest rates. Prior to FY23, we averaged 60 to 70 million per year for our cash balance. For FY23, it was 144 million, and for FY24, we're projecting 180 million. And the main drivers for that cash balance is really it's the stimulus draws, and we have a lot in our contingency reserve and our operating deficit reserve. And then we've also received higher FTA formula funds over the last few years that have driven that up. And so you couple the cash balances with federal interest rates being at their 22-year high, and you end up with the green bar to the right. So we are amending the budget this year to 8.3 million, which is an increase of 6.4 million. And we do expect this to get better over time as we start to receive the SB 125 funds as well. Next, within other operating revenue, we have real estate related revenues. So we're amending the budget. We're increasing it by 520,000 or 19.4%. And that is to reflect the new Grantville Station development, the TOD that we did with Greystar. We have that lease revenue coming through now, and so we're reflecting that appropriately. And then lastly, we have a category of other, which overall is decreasing by 500,000. So other operating revenue in total is increasing by 6.5 million or 26%, and that's being driven mostly by the interest. So we looked at operating revenues. So the other part of our revenue budget for operations is our subsidy revenue, which is our sales taxes and our grants. And so first we'll look at the sales tax revenues. So Transnet, that's one of our sales tax revenues. There's two pieces. There's the formula funding that's dependent upon cash receipts from sales tax receipts. And then there's also the direct operating reimbursement from Sandag for BRT and Midcoast services. So on the formula funding side, we originally used Sandag's budget of 430 million. At the time, that represented 1% growth over last year's budgeted figure. Our share of that, after sharing it regionally, is 46.8 million. And so cash receipts so far are actually trailing last year by about 1.6% through January. However, we're not too concerned because that trend is skewed because the state postponed filing deadlines until November for businesses that were impacted by last year's winter storms. And so they're expecting a lag in cash receipts. So we are still projecting to come in close to budget at this time. You can see the orange bar is Sandag's original budget. The yellow bar is a forecast by Avenue, which is a third party that Sandag uses to forecast sales taxes. And then we do our own forecast as well, and we're projecting to come in slightly favorable, but not as aggressive as Avenue. And so we're not amending the budget at this time. We're leaving it at 46.8 million. On the operating reimbursement side from Sandag, there's a slight increase of less than 1%, and that's due to an increase in the net expenses for the BRT and Midcoast services as a whole. So the other, excuse me, the other sales tax revenue that we have is TDA, or the Transportation Development Act. So for this revenue source, we know exactly what we're going to receive each year. We file a claim with Sandag in the beginning of the year. And then if sales tax receipts come in higher than the budget, that excess revenue goes into a reserve at the county. If the cash receipts come in lower, then we draw from that reserve from the county. And so the overall budget for both operations and capital this year was 136 million. That's the claim number that we submitted. 93 million of that was in the operating budget. We don't have any concerns at this time. The TDA receipts are tracking very similarly to Transnet, and so we're not amending the budget or the claim. Next, we have state transit assistance, or STA. So this is the state sales tax on diesel fuel, and it's distributed based on a formula. The original budget was 39.4 million to be used for both operations and capital. That was based on the January 2023 State Controller's report. We are revising the budget downward to 36.5 million based on the governor's January proposal that just came out. And so it's forecasted to decrease by 2.9 million at this time. We won't know the final number until May, but we're going to reflect the best information that we have. We are applying that entire decrease of 2.9 million to the operating budget so that we can keep the capital budget whole, and then we can backfill a decrease in STA in the operating budget with stimulus funds. So we have that flexibility in the operating budget. Next, we have the SB 125 funding. So this is the new $4 billion in state funding that was distributed to us through the TIRCP program. It's used for both operations or capital. You guys are familiar with this. We brought it to the board for the application process, but they have pretty strict requirements in increasing service, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, serving disadvantaged communities, et cetera. The original legislation has MTS receiving 284 million over multiple fiscal years. There has been talk that these funds may be threatened by the state budget shortfall, but at this time, we're still anticipating to receive 284 million until we see that those final discussions at the state. Regardless, this year we need to include 4.5 million in the FY24 amended budget, and that is 3 million for the Iris Rapid operations, and then 1.5 million for the security enhancements, which was the additional security staff that was approved by the board. So here's a summary of our overall revenues. So operating revenues overall are increasing by 2 million. That's really favorable interest revenue being partially offset by unfavorable passenger revenue. And then below that, we have subsidy. On the federal subsidy line, we have a decrease of 305,000. That's an FTA route restoration grant. We're still going to receive the funding, but we're pushing that to next year's budget based on when we think we can actually spend the funds. And so that's really just a shift to a future fiscal year. The big drivers here, STA decreasing by 2.9 million, and then we're including the 4.5 million in SB 125 funds, which are reflected. So total subsidy is increasing by 1.4 million, or a little less than 0.5%. And then on the reserves line, you can see in the original budget, we projected adding 34 million to the operating deficit reserve, or contributing that amount at year end. Now we are forecasting contributing 30 million, so about 3.5 million less. And so that's really due to the structural deficit, which we'll get to in a later slide. But overall revenues are increasing by about 7 million, or 1.7%. So moving on to expenses. So first we'll look at personnel. Within personnel, we have wages. So the administration wages are increasing by $2 million in this budget draft, or 10.5%. The main driver here is the 47 new security positions that were approved by the board. 45 of those are expected to be hired by the end of the fiscal year. And so we built the budget based on their proposed hiring schedule. This year, we've also hired 4 new FTEs to support the call center. Administration, in this proposed budget, we have an increase of 60 FTEs in total. So 59 of those have already gone to the board in separate requests and have already been approved. And then we also have 1 additional request for a staff attorney position. On the bus operations side, we have wages increasing 556,000, or 1.2%. That's mostly student operator or training wages, as well as maintenance wages. So we've been offering more classes as we try to address the driver shortage. We've had better enrollment than we have in years past, and so this is really a reflection of that. And then on the maintenance side, we've just been using more hours. Part of it was a shift between paid time off, using less PTO and more straight time hours. And so we're just reflecting that in this budget draft. On the bus operations side, we're adding a net increase of 2.5 FTEs. We're hiring 3 bus operator trainers, and then we're removing 1 part-time bus operator position from the position table. We had 1 part-time bus driver, and we no longer have a part-time bus driver. So we're just cleaning up the position table and removing that.
And if I could pause here, I just wanted to let you know, so we're trying to revamp the way we're training classes so that we're going to have classes going every 3 weeks versus what we typically would do, which is every 6 weeks, just to try to take advantage of the moment. And so that's why we're adding additional trainers, because you really do need 1 trainer for every 4 drivers that you're going to train.
On the trolley operations side, we have wages increasing in the amended budget by 1.1 million, or 3.1%. A lot of that is operator wages are increasing by 458,000, or almost 4%. A lot of that's overtime, and then also increasing the training budget. We also anticipate hiring additional drivers to prepare for the June service enhancements. Flagging wages, we have increasing by 239,000 or 12.7%. And that's mostly, it's all hours driven. There's a lot of fluctuation in the hours for flagging based on how well the hiring's going and the amount of projects we have going. And so we're just increasing that based on the hours trend so far. Facility wages are increasing by 336,000 or 11.3%. And that's the service persons hours. Once again, we've seen a large increase in year over year hours. We didn't increase the head count. They're just utilizing more hours. And so we're reflecting that as well. And then on the trolley side, we're adding a net increase of 24.3 FTEs. 4.8 of those have already gone to the board and are approved. Those were the 4 construction safety supervisors, which were new positions. And then we also shifted 5 part-time train operators to 5 full-time. So that makes up the 4.8 in total. And then the new request is to add 15 part-time construction safety flag persons, and that's to support the Orange Line renovations that are SB 125 funded. And then we're also requesting 12 full-time train operators to ramp up for the service expansion in June as part of that SB 125 program of projects. So overall, wages in this amended budget are increasing by 3.7 million or about 3.6% in total. And then also within personnel, we have fringe benefits. So we have pension costs increasing by 332,000 or 1.1%. That's mostly the CalPERS payment for the union employees. Healthcare costs, we have increasing by 934,000 or 5.4%. So we've been trending unfavorable for the San Diego Transit union premiums and employee deductions. Now both of the trusts have been fully dissolved and we're no longer covering the premiums with those unspent trust balances. And so we have a good picture of what the real deductions and what the premiums are. And so this is really a refinement of that. Also contributing to the healthcare increases is the fact that we had budgeted a 10% increases for the premiums that go into effect in January each year, and they came in at an average of 12 to 13% higher. So that's also contributing. Paid absences are decreasing by 205,000. The other big one is we have workers' compensation costs increasing by 458,000 from the original budget, and that's all claim payments within trolley. We have increasing 450K. And so if you look at the bottom chart, the green bar on the rightmost full bar is what we're budgeting now for the amended budget. And it's really looking closer to the experience that we had in FY23 for trolley. We had assumed a more normal year for the original budget, but we haven't seen that come down yet. Next, we have outside services. The largest category within outside services is purchase transportation. That's our fixed route contract operated by Transdev and also by First Transit for the minibus. And then we have the ADA paratransit contract operated by First Transit. And so on the fixed route side, we had reduced service in FY23 due to the driver shortages that we were experiencing. And so the FY24 original budget had assumed that we restore most of those cut services in January of 2024. Based on where we are with our driver counts and what we think we can actually operate, we are reducing the service levels in the amended budget by 1.8% overall, and that's all on the Transdev side with a 2.3% reduction for the fixed route service. On the ADA paratransit side, we've come in close to volumes and expenses that were included in the original budget, so we're not making any significant changes in the amended budget. And then so you can see in the table to the right, purchase transportation overall is decreasing by 1.6 million, and that's all driven by the reduction in service levels on the Transdev side. Also within outside services, we have a couple other categories. So security costs, we're leaving very close to the original budget. We've been tracking nicely there. Repair and maintenance costs were increasing significantly by $2 million or 17.6%. So that's being driven by the Orange Line tie replacement project within the track department. So we had originally budgeted 1.6 million in the original budget based on what we thought would actually be able to be completed this fiscal year. However, we have the vendor under contract now, and they provided operations with a schedule, and they think they can get a full 3.7 million worth of ties replaced by March of this fiscal year. And so we increased that budget to reflect the scope that they can actually achieve. Engines and transmissions are increasing by 171,000 or almost 24%. That's based on the experience they've had on the bus side so far. They've had some expensive engine and transmission overhauls, and so we're reflecting that. And then lastly, we have a line for other services, which overall is only increasing by 84,000 or less than 0.5%. But there's a lot going on within that. So we have fare system costs, which is our Pronto in-it maintenance agreement primarily. So we have that decreasing by about $500,000 this year. And that's really a refinement of when we think different milestones are going to be completed. We have contract amendments. And so we took a really deep dive on the timing of those and then also how those costs are being shared regionally. And that's what we came up with. Land management costs are increasing significantly by 842,000. There were a variety of very expensive facility improvement projects for some of our real estate. We had multiple fencing projects. We also had a billboard maintenance contract that was negotiated and went into effect this year. It was very expensive. And so there's a lot of activity on the real estate side. And so we're seeing that in increased expenses. Contract services, that's our fixed route bus service, is decreasing by 743,000 for their other outside services. That's really a paving project that was originally budgeted for this year. We're pushing that to next year based on when we think they can actually spend the funds and the project manager availability. And then bus operations, other outside services are decreasing by 382,000. They have a variety of facility construction repair projects going on at the Imperial Avenue division downstairs, as well as the Kearney Mesa division. We're pushing some of that budget out based on when we think they can spend it. And then lastly, we have trolley, other outside services increasing by almost 700,000. There were some bridge repairs that were not included in the original budget in the track maintenance department that were very expensive. I want to say about 400,000. So we're reflecting that in the budget. We also are doing some building B office rehabilitations and renovations downstairs, which is also contributing to that increase as well. So overall, these other non-purchase transportation outside services are increasing by 2.2 million or 4.6%. So last slide on expenses. So materials and supplies are increasing by 2.4 million or almost 15%. This is almost entirely in revenue vehicle parts. So that's the bus and trolley parts. Most of the increase is in trolley. We have pretty severe or significant inflation in parts costs, as well as we've had some very expensive repairs. On the bus side, it's more just raw inflation. They haven't seen an increase in the parts used, but more an increase in some of the prices. Some of the parts they referenced as tripling and quadrupling in price. And so that's really the driver there. Risk management, we're reducing the budget by 557,000 or 6%. That's claim-related legal expenses are decreasing based on what we've seen and what we expect for the rest of the year. And we also had some favorable claim recoveries in the first half of the year that we're reflecting. G&A costs are decreasing by 629,000 or 9.2%. Main drivers there is we're reducing the budget for credit card processing fees related to the fare system based on the run rate so far. And we're also reducing that advertising budget within marketing. And that's based on what we think they can actually, or what they think they can actually spend this year. We have a new contract, and it's really just a refinement of the projected spend. And then lastly, we have a category for other, which includes leases and debt service, which is increasing by 42,000. So in total, these other categories are increasing by 1.3 million or 3.8%. So here's a summary of expenses. We went through all of these except energy. So energy, we didn't have a slide on because we're tracking very closely to budget. Overall, we're reducing the budget by 12,000 or 0% variance. And so overall expenses are forecasted to increase by about 7 million or 1.7%. So here we have the consolidated look at our revenues and expenses combined, where we can also see the structural deficit and our bottom line for the new projected FY24 budget. And so we have operating revenues increasing by 2 million. That's the interest revenue offset by the passenger revenue. Recurring subsidy decreasing by 3.1 million. That's mainly the reduction in STA. So our recurring revenues are actually forecasted to decrease by about $1 million. And then on the next line, we have expenses increasing by about 7 million. And so this budget includes a projected structural deficit of 59 million versus the 51 million projection in the original budget. Now, to get to our overall budget, we need to add back in the one-time funds that we're using to cover the structural deficit. And so we have the 4.5 million in new SB 125 funding. That's considered one-time funding. And that's why we have it counting against the structural deficit. We have 85 million in federal stimulus funds that we plan to draw. And then that would leave us with 30.4 million to contribute to the operating deficit reserve at the end of the year, and that's on the reserves line. So we do have a balanced budget in this draft. And then just a quick update on the stimulus funds. So we had 360 million in total since the beginning of those programs. We've drawn 260 million of that. So we have 99.7 million remaining. We do contribute the excess funds each year that we don't need to a reserve, the operating deficit reserve. We currently have 57 million in that reserve. And then based on this amended budget, we plan on adding an additional 30 million to that at year end. Between stimulus funds and SB 125 that we have projected in the future, we in this draft have the structural deficit balanced through FY28. But we'll be revising that and fine tuning that as well as we continue to build out the FY25 budget. And then so here we have just a look at the budget development calendar. So the next meeting will be the board meeting next week where we'll take the same presentation. Then we have a BDC meeting scheduled for the end of March where we'll do our first look at the FY25 forecast. Then we'll take that same presentation to the board on April 25th. Then we'll have our final BDC meeting on May 8th, where we'll have the final look at our FY25 budget. And then the plan as of now is to take that final budget to the May 16th board meeting for the public hearing and adoption. And then so that brings me to the staff recommendation that the Budget Development Committee forward a recommendation that the MTS Board of Directors enact resolution number 24-1, amending the FY24 operating budget for MTS, San Diego Transit, San Diego Trolley, Contract Services, and the Coronado Ferry. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Meyer. Clerk, are there any members of the public wishing to comment on item number 4?
We have no public comments, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to move on to comments from members of the committee. Would any members of the committee like to make any comments at this time? And I just want to remind you folks that this is an actionable item, so a motion is required. Councilmember Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the STA reduction revenue, 2.9 million. Do you think that will be softened or restored? Is it due to late sales tax reporting as the FTA numbers are?
I think this is more so it's really a mystery what the May revise is going to look at this point. And we've heard from different people over the last few months, like that the the SB 125 is not close to being guaranteed. And so, I mean, I would expect, I mean, the 36 million or the reduction of 2.9 million is really our best guess at this time. I don't have any expectation whether it's going to come in higher or lower than that at this point. And it seems like there's a lot of pending decisions at the state level on how they're going to address the shortfall as well. So,
Okay, thank you. Let's go back 3 slides to slide 19, which is kind of the summary on the expense side. There. So I get the 5 million variance in personnel is due to the additional CCI positions and the training related positions. I get the 1.6 is favorable just due to reduced services on the contract side, not having enough drivers to fulfill all the budgeted positions. I get 2.4 million for materials and supplies. My question on that is, are we kind of hostage to the industry? Because when it comes to parts and those kind of services, that there's just a few number of suppliers and that boosts the cost of things?
yeah, I mean, through discussions with operations, I know, so we had, like, just for an example, like they switched from, I forgot what they were before, but they started using steel pistons versus, I don't know, maybe aluminum or something like that. And there was a cost savings, they were more reliable. And so we'd see savings on that side. And then there's other parts that commonly go out. And so I forgot what exactly the part was, but the maintenance manager on the bus side was explaining that some of the other parts, like they're making up for it in other ways. Like there was one of the parts, like I said, tripled or quadrupled in price. And it's really because they can. And so it's, yeah.
Lack of competition sometimes is driving some of these prices. I think at a prior board meeting, we talked about, I think Sharon, you went to DC, and pre-pandemic, there were 9 bus manufacturers and we're down to 2. Certain New Flyer had 40 sitting on their, 400 sitting on their lots because of lack of parts. So less competition is just going to drive up the price, not only for parts, but for new things as well. That certainly is a pressure on the expense side of things here. On the are FEMA reimbursements any part of this discussion where some of these expenses are FEMA eligible?
So we actually have anything that was flood related, we actually have being charged to separate cost centers that aren't included in this budget. And that's because we are expecting 100% cost recovery through both the combination of insurance and the FEMA funds. So those are separated out of here. So,
Okay,
yeah.
as an extraordinary one-time expense kind of thing.
Yeah, so, and, you know, the FEMA funds, that's not a guarantee, as public agencies. I mean, it could be 8 years before we see the reimbursements for those. And that's something that we'll continue to strive to get, but, ultimately, keeping it in a separate account helps us. We did already receive a payment from the insurance company as a sort of retainer, while they're still assessing what their part of that will be.
That might be a topic to include our legislative agenda, is to add the FEMA thing, so it doesn't take 8 years, it takes 5 years or something.
Yeah, well, we're definitely seeking an appropriation on our behalf.
Sounds good.
And FTA has a program as well for emergency response, that if they get it funded in the appropriation, we could access those funds.
Sounds good. My last question is on passenger levels, which relates to passenger revenue. Do we know what segment of our ridership is choice riders versus non-choice riders? I don't know, Gordon, if you have that answer.
I don't have that answer. Dennis might.
That might be.
I can tell you that pre-pandemic, we had a passenger survey that did show it to be at least 70% was transit dependent, as they told us they were transit dependent. Sandag is undergoing a new passenger survey, and we'll find that out better once that data is in the report.
I think that would be good to know eventually, because as we seek to increase ridership, there's different messages to different audiences. And certainly as we're seeing, it's good, we're 10% up year over year. We thought we'd be 14%. So why are we short? I don't know. But as we get our marketing messages to different segments, that would help boost ridership by appealing to their pain points or needs.
Yeah, and I will tell you that we were very aggressive and when we budgeted our number for ridership, we were intent on making it to the point where we were able to reinstate all the bus service that we had to cut because of lack of drivers. We thought that our marketing campaign was solid and we would be able to increase that. So we purposely made a very aggressive goal for this budgeted year.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That's my comments.
Thank you. Chair Whipper?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this presentation. I am glad that we've been hiring more staff so that we could provide increased service and making salaries more competitive, which is all a part of the increase in expenses. Glad to see that our structural deficit is balanced for several years. And passenger levels up 10% year over year. To just sort of continue the conversation around, our previous budgeted level of 16% is what we budgeted for a passenger increase. And recognizing that we were being aggressive when we did that. Since we're going to be looking at the 2025 budget fairly soon, and just so that this is instructive, to what do we attribute the lower level than what we might have been going for? I've seen some of the advertising we're doing. I think it's actually quite good. And I know that we've been doing a lot in terms of adding security, emphasizing cleanliness, working to increase, frequency and hours and doing a lot to increase ridership. But since last year, what would account for that delta maybe that we haven't seen yet?
Well, one is that we anticipated putting back in all of the services that we had cut due to the driver shortages. So
Okay.
that was a significant part of it. Unprecedented rain in San Diego. That rain always gets people to cut out discretionary trips or maybe use another way to get to their job. The office market has not bounced back 100% the way, we thought it might. There's just a lot of factors that are out there. But hopefully, we are budgeting in the next budget year to put back in the service frequencies that we cut. And we are going to be increasing service on the trolley. Trolley is looking strong. It's a lot of the bus services that we need to help get back to where they need to be.
Very good. Okay, thank you. That answers my question. I'm happy to make a motion to adopt a staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Second.
Wonderful. So we have a motion and a second. Thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough and very clear and easy to follow. I think the good news here is that our ridership and passenger revenue continue to improve. Even if it's not at the level we're expecting in the budget, we do see it spike in a positive direction. I think all told, I think staff's recommendation for the mid-year budget amendment is very prudent, and I absolutely will support it. It's funny, I had the same kind of conundrum with the STA $2.9 million reduction. You mentioned on page 10 that it was just based on the governor's budget memo. And I really don't follow the state government as much as I should. And so these funds, are these funds that the governor can just modify on a whim, or is it based on diesel fuel coming in at a lower rate?
Actually, I don't 100% know answer that question. Yeah.
Sorry. I thought you knew everything.
Dang, you got me at the very end.
Mike Thompson, Director of Financial Planning Analysis. So it is based on the diesel sales, what's the volume of sales and the price of the diesel fuels. But it's also subject to the legislative process a little bit. They can move that around a little bit every year. So there's a forecast that takes place when the governor puts its budget together. And then they finalize that budget in May, the amended FY24 budget. And that will determine what the overall bucket of money is. And then we get a share, a formula share of that.
Got you.
And also, Mike, do they calculate it based on pre-pandemic levels of ridership and revenue, or have they adjusted it back to current?
I believe FY25 is the first year they're adjusting it back to current.
Okay.
So it is using the old formula through 24.
Each transit agency, they appropriate it based on two factors. One is local revenue, which is fares and sales tax, local sales tax. And then the other is by population. So they are still using, you're confirming that they're still using the old numbers from
Yes.
pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and so this number, the 2.9, was there an indication of whether this was just a whim or whether it was lower diesel fuel being utilized?
It is lower diesel prices, actually. It's
Lower
not the
diesel
actual
prices.
utilization. It's basically the function of price at this point in time, based on the forecast so far to date.
Got you. And then with the governor's targeting of green, just California becoming more green, I would say that this $39.4 million is, we should be probably not, what's the word? We probably shouldn't be relying as much.
Declining used commodity, yes.
Thank
It
you.
should go- keep going
Declining
down.
used commodity, yes. This is something I think that we should look at in the future because it appears that the number is just going to continue to go lower and lower. If it's just based on whim, then I agree our lobbyists can go and lobby Sacramento and push legislation in that front. But we should be taking a look at this for the next few years. Something that piqued my interest, as I stated. But thank you for the presentation. I do appreciate it. There is a motion and a second on the floor, and we're going to proceed with the voice vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? No, and no abstention. So the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And so we're going to move on to item number 5, which is the proposed fiscal year 2025 capital improvement program. And I believe, Mr. Thompson, Mike, are you going to be taking this? Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, again, Mike Thompson, Director of Financial Planning Analysis. I am joined by Eric Chang, who's our Transit Asset Management Program Manager. He actually drives this development process for the finance side for MTS. So we want to quickly talk about the funding levels for fiscal year 25. And we look at our funding levels on the capital program in 2 different buckets, really. The recurring revenues that are basically the revenues that are shared with operations like the federal, TDA, STA that Gordon just talked about. And then also we have another one called Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, which is another formula fund that we get steadily every year. So these are the revenues that we know we're going to get every single year based on some sort of formula. And then we have our other revenues in the capital program. Most of this is discretionary type stuff where we're going after competitive grants for specific projects, but it also includes other revenue programs that are short-term in nature, one-time in nature, and that includes the Senate Bill 125. We are getting additional transit intercity capital rail program funding, formula funding for those years, and we're getting a new source of funding called Zero Emission Transit Capital Programs, the ETCP, over 4 years as well, based on the original legislation. So those are included in the non-recurring bucket in our revenue projection. And also in non-recurring, we have some other one-time funding, some carryovers from prior year, some carryovers from closed projects, things of that nature. So looking at the actual numbers in revenue for fiscal year 25, you can see we have about 41 million in federal funding that's going to be dedicated to the CIP after what goes into the operating budget. You'll have about 46 million in TDA. Again, that's shared between operations capital with a formula. State transit assistant, we sort of talked about, Gordon talked about. We put 11.3 million in the operating budget. We put the rest in capital. And because it has been moved around a lot in the past, so we try to keep capital, most in capital and keep it whole, and then it doesn't impact operations as much. We're projecting right now, again, this is based on the governor's projection for FY '25. 27.7 will be in the capital budget, and 11.3 again will be in operations for next year. We also get a small bucket of stated good repair money on the STA, which is formula funding, about $5 million. And then I talked about LCTOPs and other formula funding strictly for zero emission vehicles. That's $8 million. And then we have our non-recurring type funding. We had a couple of large TRSP awards the last few years. That's going to be programmed about 35.5 million in this next budget as we really start getting to work on the orange line. We're also including 43 million of SB 125 related funding in this budget. 26 million of that will be TRSP funding going towards the orange line, and the rest is the ZETCP funding. It's about $17 million, where we'll be using that towards our zero emission bus transition. In our other bucket, we have $37 million, and this is transfers from closed projects and carryovers from prior years primarily. So a total of 243 million is available for this CIP. It's a very large number, the largest number that I've seen in my history here at MTS. Of that 243, 115 million is one-time in nature. So before we start talking about the projects we want to fund, we just want to talk a little bit about the development of the CIP and what guides these decisions. We do have Board Policy 65 on transit asset management, and MTS commits to effectively manage its transit assets and keep them in a state of good repair. And state of good repair means to support safe, efficient, and reliable transit services across the organization. So we'll talk a lot about that. It is a major upkeep to run a transit system, especially with a rail system as well. You can see our 20-year forecast is almost $3 billion, or an average of 140 million a year, just to upkeep our existing system before you even start adding anything. A majority of that is just in revenue vehicles. The timing and replacement of revenue vehicles over those 20 years is a very large number. MTS is also required to comply with other maintenance regulations from the FTA, the Federal Railroad Administration, and the California Public Utilities Commission, so those are factored into our decision-making as well. And we do base the capital project prioritization and other capital management decisions on these type of asset management rules of keeping everything safe, efficient, and in a reliable, safe manner. So our process began in September with the request for projects. Every department looks at their previous year 20-year forecast and updates that. Then they also submit specific projects for the next 5 years, and then also prioritize those projects. That is consolidated agency-wide, and then we have a meeting to discuss how to prioritize all those project lists. So each committee member is responsible for discussing their requests, and then the group decides what we can fund this current fiscal year. All projects with safety and our operational needs are priority 1, and all those were able to be funded again this year. The project list is also subject to an analysis based on social equity principles, and there was no disproportionate impact found on low-income and minority populations. So for our 5-year look, there's a total project needs of $1.3 billion. And you can see revenue vehicles between bus and rail is a large portion of that. We also have some facility construction projects needs over the next 5 years of $80 million. Rail infrastructure needs is over $372 million over the next 5 years. And then other equipment's a smaller number, about 60 million. And then other initiatives, and this 5-year look is $387 million. That is primarily just the zero emission bus transition and getting charging infrastructure at the facilities. But we do have a couple other smaller initiatives in the out years for an Imperial Avenue Transit Center expansion and a future Southwestern Rapid. And it also, that initiative also does include Division 6, the Clean Transit Advancement Campus, or CTAC. So again, 1.3 billion over the 5 years. In FY25 alone, we had 312 million in project requests, 74 total projects requested funding. With 243 million available, we're able to fund 78% of those requests. So we're able to fund 64 projects. About 80 million of that is in revenue vehicles alone between bus and rail. And then we have about 20 million for facility and construction projects, about 69 million for rail infrastructure, 20 million for other equipment installations, and then 53 million in other initiatives, which is primarily, again, zero emission bus charging infrastructure. So we do have all the projects listed, both the funded and unfunded, in the attachment B. And there's also descriptions included in attachment C. We'll basically give some little more character on how much is being funded for each of these project categories going forward. So starting with our fleet replacement, we do have a fleet of 768 buses. Those typically are 12-year useful lives. So we try to replace 1/12 of those every single year on those 12-year vehicles. And then the smaller minibuses and ADA minibuses do have shorter lifespans than the large buses. And the chart below gives you a flavor of how many of each type of vehicle we have in the fleet, but also shows you the price difference between the CNG buses we've been purchasing and the battery electric buses we need to replace them with going forward. So that difference is built into our fleet plan over the next 5 years. Again, we try to keep the funding levels as normal as possible and account for bus spikes when we have to purchase more buses than normal in a given year. So this next year, we are allocating $58.3 million towards bus replacements. We're going to be actually purchasing 38 buses, 10 of which will be battery electric 40-foot buses. And you can see for the next couple of years, we're also expecting about $60 million in funding. And then in FY 28 and 29, that number is projected to jump because starting in 28 and 29, we need to start, half of our purchases need to be battery electric buses. So that's accounting for the difference in price for those vehicles. Over the 5 years, again, it's $348 million on bus vehicles alone. We also have our light rail vehicle fleet. We have 168 vehicles in this fleet. These ones last a lot longer, 25 to 30 years, so it makes the replacement process a little more involved. We are currently replacing the 52 SD100 fleet, and we've been doing that for a number of years now, and we've been saving it for about 8 years to be able to fund this program. So the first order was of 25 was placed in 2019, and the option was exercised for the next 22 and 2021. We are still receiving those vehicles. We still have 22 remaining to be delivered this year and next. So we have funded most of this project. We do need to fund another $21 million this current fiscal year, for fiscal year 25, and also another $5 million in fiscal year 26. And then that will be fully funded. But once that happens, we need to start beginning funding, saving for the SD7 replacements, which will start saving for that in FY 26. So again, 21 million funded for this year. Over the 5 years, it's 68 million for rail revenue vehicles. The next category is facility and construction projects. We do have 5 different operating facilities across the county, including the 4 bus divisions and our rail division behind us. We also have all of our passenger facilities were being funded through this sort of category. We have 68 major passenger facilities, and we also have transit centers and bus shelters across the county as well that are funded through capital. So for this category, there was 21 projects submitted for fiscal year 25. We're able to fund 18 of those 21, and 3 were not funded. So it's 21 million in total funding being allocated for this. And the example of a type of project is these pictures on the right. It's our Rio Vista platform on the trolley line. You can see the platform is actually sinking a little bit on both sides of the platform. So it's something we've been saving for a couple of years, and we're funding more towards that this current fiscal year. But of that 21 million, 9 million is going towards the bus facilities, 2.4 million is in rail projects, and then about 10 million is in passenger related projects. The next category is rail infrastructure projects. We have made a large investment in rail infrastructure to build the system, and it does require a lot of upkeep. The rail infrastructure, we break into 2 subcategories. First is what's directly related to the physical rail, and we call that the track side. So it's rails and ties, it's any special track work like crossovers, and it's also the grade crossings, which is what you see in the picture, just the wear and tear on where the track meets a road. And how much degradation can happen over time, and then what it looks like when it's nice and fresh. And it does improve the ride for both the drivers going across the road, but also the trolley passengers as well. The other category here is the maintenance of wayside type of projects. That is the bridges and elevated track. It is the drainage around the track, and it's also all the electrification and signaling, where those type of projects will fall into that category. So for these two subcategories, we're funding a total of $69 million this next fiscal year. And that includes about 56 million on the track side, and that is primarily the orange line improvements we are funding with TRCP and Senate Bill 125. And then we're also doing another 13 million on the MOW side for signaling and electrification type things. So again, 14 projects funded, 4 projects were not able to be funded based on funded levels. Other equipment and installation projects are largely just equipment replacement for the most part, and it's also all of our IT and network needs. So ops equipment is basically service vehicles and maintenance cleaning type equipment that's being replaced. That's a total of $10.2 million being funded this next fiscal year. Then on the admin side, it's primarily IT related infrastructure, network, and storage type things. That is another $10 million being funded for this next fiscal year. We're able to fund 19 of the 21 project requests on this type of project. So this next slide looks at just our stated good repair needs over the next 5 years. You can see we were able to fund $190 million of stated good repair projects for this next fiscal year. 10 million of projects was going to be deferred. Well, 9 million is going to be deferred to future fiscal years. And the overall need over this 5-year period is $933 million just in stated good repair. And our recurring revenue streams over that same 5-year period is only 600 million. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the discretionary and other revenue programs just to be able to meet our stated good repair needs over a 5-year period. We do have some other initiatives that we were able to fund this next fiscal year outside of stated good repair. Most of it relates to the innovative clean transit infrastructure. We have projects in place across the bus divisions, all 4 of them. So we're funding $20 million towards Kearney Mesa. We're funding another $13 million towards Imperial Avenue. And then we're starting the programs down in East County as well to get that thing off the ground. And then additional funding for South Bay that is already, the charging infrastructures in place there. That's the picture on the screen, is the new South Bay overhead gantry. So we have that. It charges 24 buses. We basically have to do that 9 more times just at South Bay alone to get the whole division done. So we'll do these projects and then we'll circle back around and do another project at each division to keep expanding the capacity. So again, it's about $39 million all towards charging infrastructure, with about 60 million unfunded because we have not put any money towards Division 6 or CTAC this next fiscal year. We are going after a lot of competitive grant programs to help fund that division, and so we can complete it and help our transition to zero emission buses as well. So the total need just related to innovative clean transit is $332 million over this next 5-year period. And then there were 6 other initiatives that were submitted. 12th and Imperial Transit Center has a couple projects as we build that new transit center next door. We're also funding some additional funding towards the Green Line Imperial Double Track project that is currently underway. We hope to finalize that project. And then the El Cajon Transit Center project need a little bit more funding as well. So those 2 are being added. So a total of 14.4 million of other projects being funded and other initiatives. So this next slide looked at the overall 5-year look. So you can see our stated repair needs of 5 years is $933 million. Other initiatives in total is $388 million. So again, $1.3 billion in projects identified over the next 5 years. We do have 842 million of recurring and non-recurring revenues identified, but that does leave a deficit of $478 million or 64% funded. So going forward, I mean, we always have challenges meeting our unconstrained list of projects every year. No different this year. There's significant shortfall overall over the 5-year period. So that's ha- reminds us to keep aggressive on all the grant programs and earmark type programs that we can. Agency objectives this year, a listing here is we do keep stadium repair as the first priority. We are going to start looking at climate resiliency a little more and start planning for that. So things like the flood that happened a couple months ago can be somewhat prevented or mitigated. And after that, it's all about zero emission bus transition. We need to get the infrastructure in place to be able to charge all these buses that we need to start buying. And then we need the Clean and Trans Advancement Campus to help with that and give us space to actually do the construction at all of our existing divisions. And then any sort of acceleration on our transition program for battery electric buses or any service expansion that we want to do is really dependent on getting CTAC in place so we can go faster on battery electric buses. And as always, as I mentioned, we continue to be aggressive with grant and earmark opportunities. And that brings us to the staff recommendation. And the recommendation is that the Budget Development Committee recommend that the Board of Directors approve the fiscal year 25 capital improvement program with the estimated federal and non-federal funding levels, which were attachments A and B. As the federal appropriation figures are finalized and or other project funding sources become available, allow the CEO to identify and adjust projects for the adjusted funding levels. The second part is recommend that the San Diego Association of Governments Board of Directors approve the submittal of the federal sections 5307, 5337, and 5339 applications for the MTS Federal Fiscal Year 25 CIP. And then also recommend that San Diego Board of Directors approve the amendment number 12 of the 2023 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP, in accordance with this CIP. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. First, we're going to take it to the public. Are there any members of the public wishing to be recognized?
We have no public comments, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to comments from committee members and Councilmember Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Great presentation, very thorough. I'd like to commend staff on the attachments, which were very helpful. There were a lot of pages in those attachments, but they really were, I noticed them, I recognize them, I appreciate them because they answer a lot of questions. Especially, I'd like to call attention to Appendix E or Attachment E, and especially the maps on there were very helpful in just kind of seeing, so where are all these projects going? And what kind of projects? So excellent work by the staff in comprehensively answering questions with these attachments. My one question is, are there any ARPA funds? I think ARPA funds are supposed to expire at the end of this year. You have to use them. Do we have any ARPA funds at risk in any of these projects?
No, we used all that for the operating.
For the operating side?
Yeah, and we've also drawn it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good work. Thank you.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I will approve or move to approve the staff's recommendation.
Thank you so much. Chair?
Happy to second.
Wonderful. Thank you for the presentation and thank you for the work that you guys are doing. I had a chance to go check out the South Bay Division, and it's just impressive. Seeing it in a picture definitely does not do it justice. And seeing that we're going to have 9 more of those stations is just the work that has been done, electrifying our buses, and the work that still needs to be done. I think it's a lot, to say the least. And obviously, a lot of these are state mandates and also federal mandates. So more reason why they should leave the SB 125 money alone, right? So that we can continue to fund these projects. Where are we with Division 6?
With Division 6, we funded about $80 million, and we've been using that just to purchase land. We've purchased 2 parcels of land, and that there's 2 parcels left to go, I believe.
We just closed escrow on Monday and Tuesday on 2 parcels of land, and then we're working through the process with the other 2.
Well, congratulations.
So now that we have the land, we can be more aggressive on these large federal programs, for competitive programs, because before, if you don't have the land, it's like a really pie in the sky type ask. Now that we have the land, it's a more definitive ask. So we hope to be real aggressive with a couple of those programs this year and get some more additional grant funding for that project.
Got you. And since we just had this item, I'm wondering, how your, the CIP, program, how it links up with the transit amenity policy? If it does at all.
There's projects included that Dennis alluded to in his presentation that are included in CIP, but it's not really like part and parcel of each other. It's just that they're doing their thing and they put projects and requests in for the 5-year CIP as according to that plan.
Got you. And so they're regularly, they're in competition like the rest of the other divisions?
Correct.
And is there an equity component to your decision for the
There-
CIPs?
There is,
Yeah, we perform a Title VI analysis. Dennis, you could probably speak to that.
And so Sandag will come back with comments on that, but that's been done. The results of that showed no disproportionate burden or disparate impact to low-income or minority communities or disproportionate benefit to non-low-income or non-minority communities.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And that concludes my comments, but thank you again. So we do have a motion and a second on the floor, and we are going to proceed with the voice vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions, I'm sorry. So the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Item number 6 is our next meeting date, which is scheduled March 27th at 9 a.m. So we're going to move on to item number 7. Any other staff or committee member communication? None, hearing none. We're going to move on to item number 8, which is our adjournment. And I want to thank everybody in attendance for your input today. This meeting of the MTS Budget Development Committee is now adjourned, and everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.